Hey there guys, so in this video I wanted to talk about my history and my experience with psilocybin mushrooms. So for the last few months I've been microdosing. Now about 16-17 years ago in 2007 when I was 17 years old and I was like making loads of mistakes and stuff and just being an idiot. I did do a higher dose of mushrooms. And I want to talk about that in this video. So I didn't use mushrooms for years and years and years. Basically, yeah, like I said, I used them in 2007. And what happened was the first time that I ever used psilocybin mushrooms is for a friend, and we bought some from some guy, from some hippie. And we didn't know what we was doing. I didn't know what I was doing, and I took probably, I believe it was like half a gram, but I don't know for sure, but it probably was about half a gram. And I didn't get a huge effect off it. I did, looking back, I do realise that I was under the influence of it now, but at the time I didn't really realise. It was kind of like just feeling more clear, feeling a little bit, I don't know how to describe it, a little bit closer to your spirituality, I guess, is the way that I'd describe that half a gram. This wasn't cubensis though. This was for Americans in the UK, we have a different species of mushroom that grows in the wild. In America you can get cubensis growing like naturally, but here you don't get cubensis. You get the most common is liberty caps, which is psilocybin semilanciata. I can't quite pronounce it right, probably, but something like that. And so yeah, so that's what grows in the wild here. And when I was interested in mushrooms for the first time, when I was like 17, I was interested in mushrooms. I used to smoke a lot of pot, and I was interested in mushrooms for whatever reason. So I went on the hunt searching for these mushrooms. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't have a mentor, I didn't have a teacher, I didn't have any kind of, good advice on it. Back then there was no Reddit, well, there might have been, but it wasn't like it is now. There was no like YouTube, there might have been, but like it wasn't like it is now. So the main source of information was probably Shroomery, and I was only 17, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So yeah, so I didn't actually manage to find them on my own. But what happened was, after I did that half a gram experience that I mentioned, a few weeks later, I saw this hippie again, and he was walking past the house I was in. And we was like, "Yo, you alright?" And he was like, "I'm going mushroom hunting right now. If you want to come, you have to come right now." Me and my friend, my former friend anyway, let's not get into that story, but my former friend, we was like, hell yeah. So we went with him and began this amazing journey. So the reason this journey was really interesting is because it just felt spiritual, and I wasn't even under the influence. Nobody was under the influence of anything at the time, but it just felt like a very unique spiritual experience. There's certain events that happen in your life where you just feel something, and this was one of them. This is one of those once in a lifetime sort of events where you just feel something and it feels beautiful. And yeah, so we went to this field that was high up. It was high up, and we started looking for liberty caps. And these hippies that I was with, they was under the influence of 2CB, which is hallucinogenic in itself, and they were consuming mushrooms as well as they were picking them. I was completely sober, apart from maybe at the time I probably smoked pot, so I was probably high a little bit. But yeah, it was a beautiful experience. And so yeah, we was picking these mushrooms for hours, what felt like a long time. And I remember the sun starting to set, and it felt like the sun was setting for a long fucking time, like that golden fucking beautiful sort of aura that you have around sunset, and it was just really nice. And you're in a mushroom field, and you smell, and there's a smell in this mushroom field that was unique, like earth, and the nature was different compared to everywhere else. It was just different, and so yeah, I mean, maybe I was under the influence of something. I don't know. Maybe I just forgot that I was under the influence of something. Maybe that's why it felt so good. Maybe I did have 1 or 2 little mushrooms or something. I don't know. I went home, and I put these mushrooms out to dry. Still had no idea about the dosing. It's kind of stupid when I look back. Like, you should never do what I was doing. You should educate yourself and figure out the dosing, and have a pair of scales, or some scales, and weigh them properly and do it properly. You know, don't just like half-ass it, and like, you know, and do it with the right intention. Don't do it just to get high. But basically, at the time, yeah, I was young and stupid, and I just started eating all of these mushrooms, and there were a lot. And I don't know how many I ate. I don't know what the weight was, but I know that I had an extremely powerful trip that I wasn't expecting. And the reason that I ate so many more was because when I had the 0.5 gram, I didn't get that much effect. So I thought, oh, you know, you must need a really fucking high dose to fucking feel these things. In reality, you kind of don't. And also, Liberty caps are stronger than Cubenzis by like 1/3 to like 2/3 stronger. So yeah, they pack a really powerful trip. And yeah, so I took these mushrooms. At some point when I was taking these mushrooms, I found a bug in one of the mushrooms. Like, I noticed there was a bug coming out of one of the mushrooms, and that stuck with me when I was coming up. So it was like a nightmare scenario, because I realised that I'd eaten some kind of bug, and I didn't know whether or not I was and of course you start to get nausea, so I didn't know whether or not the nausea was from the mushrooms, or whether the nausea was from this weird bug that I consumed. And I started having these really weird ideas about the bug being inside of me, and all those sorts of things that you don't want to think about when you're coming off on mushrooms started happening. And I had no trip guide, I had nobody in, I was alone in this house, and yep, so I started coming up on these mushrooms. It's difficult to put these kind of experiences into words, but yeah, basically the walls start breathing. Everyone knows that, but time changes. That's the most, I think the most amazing, or the most scary and amazing thing, is that your perception of time changes, and time changes. For me, I got caught in a repetitive loop, and so it's probably too much information, but I have no mental filter, so I don't really care. So I took all my clothes off, and I was hanging outside of a window, and not on the ground floor either. It was like second floor or whatever, first floor, second floor, depending on where you're from. Yeah, I was hanging outside his window naked at like 2 a.m. in the morning, just sweating, and then I start shaking because I was so cold, and so I closed the window really quickly, and I put all my clothes back on, and I'd sit there, and in what felt like just seconds, or maybe minutes, I don't know, I'd be really hot again, and so I'd take all the clothes off again, and I'd hang outside the window again. I did that over and over, and I don't know how many times I did it, but I did that. I was doing it over and over again. During this phase, I think I got caught in another loop as well, where I went downstairs, and I think I was making a drink. I think I did that over and over again. Then the repetitive loop must have stopped, and I'm not sure if this was before the loop or after, but I had this experience where I kneeled down onto the floor, and I noticed that the carpet was kind of like, almost like, it was much more vast than I ever imagined before. It was like a forest of little hairs, and little forest of, you know, the things that come out of the carpet, the fabric, and those were like little trees, and they were like, you know, and you could look down these little trees. It was almost like you was looking down through a forest, and you'd see the, you know, the light sparkling off like a bit of debris or something on the floor, like who knows what it might have been, sugar or something, I don't know what, but so there's that whole ecosystem and your carpet, and you're just, you know, and I don't know, and then, so I believe this was like kind of like the come up stage of this trip, really. I remember that at some point I laid down on the bed and I closed my eyes, and when I closed my eyes, I began to travel through a tunnel that was like a geometric pattern, like a geometric shape, and any senses that I would have in my, you know, conscious being would distort this tunnel. So it would bend slightly or it would change slightly, and so I was travelling through this tunnel, I don't know how fast, because whatever, who knows, but I was travelling down this tunnel, and yeah, it was just changing a little bit depending on noise or depending on sort of touch sensation, stuff like that. And at some point this tunnel must have ended or whatever, something changed. I went to a place of knowledge. It was vast knowledge. It was incredible amount of knowledge, unspeakable amount of knowledge. All of the knowledge imaginable. Like a big library. I was conscious that I'd been there before. It was almost like I'd been there before in some past life. And it was just, but this library of knowledge was beyond this world that we live in. It was like another level, and it was just, yeah, it was. I can't quite remember what happened in the library, because it wasn't like a normal library. There wasn't like librarians that were at the front counter, you know, asking for your library card. It wasn't like that. There wasn't like an IT section with some computers on the side or whatever. I don't even think these things were books. So it wasn't really a library, I guess. It was just some kind of informational exchange system. That was it. The only other thing that I can remember from that is that there was some kind of entity after that, and the entity was in front of me, and the entity was like almost like playing a flute but blowing out of it, almost like a peace pipe thing, and it was blowing health at me, and it was like this green health, and it was like kind of like in a video game where like you heal your character and there's like green first aid signs floating about, and it was kind of like that. He was breathing in these floating health first aid things and I was healing from this entity. So obviously all these stories, they sound extremely crackpotty and crazy, but I'm just telling you exactly what they were. I have no real shame in any of them, and so yeah, so that was what happened, and that was the only time that I ever had a full-blown trip on any psychedelic. I'd never taken a psychedelic before, and I'd never really taken a trip dose of a psychedelic since. And that was in 2007, 16 years ago. And since then, so basically after that trip, I didn't touch psychedelics. In fact, I was shook up. Like, I was like, whoa, you know, this is way too much. Like, this is crazy. I didn't touch psychedelics. I had visual snow for like a few months, I think. Like, I wasn't sure if it would ever go away. I had some sleep paralysis incidents. After that, like with a demon sitting on the end of my bed, and I remember thinking, like, have I just fucking, like, I remember thinking, my mind's permanently broken, like, I fucked my brain, like this has gone too far, like, fuck, maybe I, you know, and so I didn't touch psychedelic. 2 years after that trip, or like 3 years after that trip, I was living a good life, and I came out of some of the depression that I had, and I came out of some of the issues I had. But I began to become depressed and anxious, and I began to drink more. This was years after, like a few years after. I began to drink more. I began to do, stupid things, a lot of stupid things, and began sliding downhill mentally. And then I lost my job, and I lost all sorts of things, and I ended up on medication, and psychedelics didn't even enter my mind. Like, mushrooms didn't even enter my mind, because why would you take mushrooms if you're already fucked up? Like, that's crazy. It's just crazy. And I was on this big addiction to Valium, diazepam, clonazepam. I was addicted to benzos. I was on Prozac, sertraline, diazepam. I've been on pregabalin. I had an addiction to pregabalin for 2 years. I had an addiction to diazepam for 5 years. I don't think I was ever getting out of that stuff alive. And so 10 years, exactly 10 years after that trip I mentioned, in 2017, I came across some LSD. And I was like, I was suicidal. Thought I was going to die soon anyway. Like, it didn't really matter what I did anymore. And I heard about this microdosing thing, and I thought I'd try it. So I made a solution with LSD and vodka, and I took what must have been between 5 to 10 micrograms of LSD. And even though this story is about psilocybin and my history of psilocybin, it's kind of relevant to explain the LSD part of the microdosing. So I took this microdose of LSD, and it almost like instantly, I took it like when I was half asleep, and I went back to sleep, and I kind of forgot that I took it. Like, I genuinely, like, I didn't remember taking it, because I think I was hungover or something, I don't know. And like, when you go back to sleep, you forget stuff. So like, and I had a habit of doing that, and like, so when I woke up, I remember just not remembering that I took anything, and I went to the window, and I was like, I feel really good today. Like, it just feels like a really good day. Like, I haven't had a day like this ever since I've been on medication. Never. Like, I haven't had a day like this for over 10 years. Like, what the fuck? Like, just this feeling I had in my old self. And at some point I must have realised that, yeah, it must have been that LSD microdose that I took. And for the rest of the day I had, like, sort of like this motivation to fix my life, this motivation to improve my life, which I hadn't had ever on the medications. And so that's what I began doing. I began changing my life, and I managed to quit the medication briefly. I managed to move away. I was microdosing mushrooms for a little bit. That's the first time that I microdosed mushrooms. A few months later, in December 2017. And for some reason I stopped microdosing the mushrooms. I only did it a few times. And I was struggling, because I'd not long quit the diazepam and stuff, and I'd moved home, and I was just really struggling. So I started drinking more again, and then I went downhill again. And for some reason I didn't pick up the microdosing again. I don't know why, but I didn't pick it back up. I relapsed on the benzos. I spent half a year addicted to benzos again before I managed to get off again. That time I didn't do it with microdosing. I went into like a sober living thing for 2 years. So once I'd been completely sober for like 2 years, and I hadn't had any benzos or any alcohol. The reason that I didn't touch microdosing during that period is because I thought, okay, I'll just, microdosing may have helped me, but maybe my brain just needs a rest from everything, So I didn't do anything, and I was depressed. I was detached and depressed, and didn't really have any emotion, much emotion and stuff like that, because I was on an anti-depressant actually. So yeah. And in the last year, I came back to microdosing. Once I left the sober living place, I started trying to get off all medication, and during that time I started microdosing again, mushrooms. I started with a really, really, really low dose. I started with 0.02 grams, so 20 milligrams of the actual dried mushroom, cubensis. And I remember after like my third dose, I remember hearing music. Like I could hear it for the first time, like as in like I could feel it. Like I hadn't felt music like that. Like the entire time that I'd been coming off benzos and on medication and stuff like that, like I hadn't felt music. Like when you feel it, I hadn't felt it. That joy had been taken away from me from the medication. And so when I did the mushrooms, I could feel the music, and oh my god, it felt amazing. And it wasn't even a high dose, it wasn't even a low dose, it was just a tiny, tiny, tiny dose. But it still had some kind of ability to almost reconnect a part of my brain that, like that tiny amount was enough to just reconnect some part of my brain to feel more emotion. And some people don't believe that small microdoses can do that. Some people believe that because there's no studies that show microdosing has an impact in depression, that it doesn't have an impact. It's just not true. It's just not true. I know for a fact that mushrooms have an impact on the brain in low doses. I can give another experience where I had extreme twitching in my somewhere in my jaw area. Basically, after my first 50 milligrams, because I started raising the dose, and once I got to 50 milligrams, my mouth would twitch really bad. I was asleep, and my whole, like, parts of my face started twitching in the night. And I believe that was probably some kind of nerves being reconnected, or some kind of recovery from all the medications when they kind of, I don't know, they just screw you up, don't they? So yeah, and I managed to get off all medications, and I've been 100% medication free for the first time, and I've been that way for a few months now. And I do think that microdosing mushrooms has helped a lot. I don't know whether or not I'd still be alive if I didn't microdose. I feel like I would, most likely, 99% sure, I wouldn't be sitting here right now alive if I hadn't microdosed. If I didn't microdose, I would be dead. Or I'd be just completely out of it on benzos or some kind of other medication or whatever. Probably be in a mental hospital or something, I don't know. But they saved my life for sure. And so now I increased the dose, and I've increased the dose over time. When I started microdosing was in October or November last year, 2022, and I've had 1 month breaks here and there, or 2 week breaks here and there. Usually I aim for the Fadiman schedule, which is two times a week. But I have gone periods of 3 times a week. I've even gone periods of 4 or even 5 times a week. Actually, no, I think only 4 times a week. So I have done the other schedules. I've played around with it. I feel like less frequently is probably better. I feel like too much of them is probably a bad thing. But I don't know. Some people do like doing them every day, and it helps them. Personally, I think some caution is advised. Even though they may be powerful, they should be respected and they should be used very carefully. I think a lot of people could benefit from microdosing. I think that if you are a person that is willing to use them as a tool to improve your life, then, and you're willing to respect them, then there's no problem. The problem is only about people that want to abuse things. So, but that's a separate subject. My doses now are psilocybin compensins, and I'm on. I typically do about between 0.1 grams. The other day I did 125 milligrams, so 0.125 grams. And I'm working my way up. I'm just increasing it. And I believe that it's doing something for me. I believe it's worked. I believe that it has been a beneficial effect. I'm sitting here and I'm just calm. Like, I haven't done any today. I haven't done any since Monday. It's like 4 days ago. And I don't know whether or not the effects that I'm having today, because today I feel like I'm having a good day. I feel like I'm having a good day today. The world isn't as dark as it used to be. The world is kind of alright. It's not too bad. It's not too bad. That's about as like the best compliment you'll get from a British person anyway. It's not too bad. That's as good as it gets in this country. So it's not too bad. In other words, in American that's fucking amazing. But yeah, it's not too bad. It's not too bad. It's alright, it's not too bad. The sun's out and it just feels good. I feel like a bit like my old self. And I don't know whether that's 100% because of just the mushrooms. I think for the last 3 days I've been using a little bit of medical cannabis when I go to bed. It's only 5% THC. And to be honest with you, it doesn't actually make me feel good when I do it. It kind of makes me feel a bit weird when I do it. A little bit more anxious when I do it. When I first did it, I was like, kind of like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done this. When I did it the second time, I was like, oh shit, I still don't know why I did this. But maybe that's having like a beneficial effect the day after or something. Because I remember the I remember that cannabis used to have that kind of effect where like the next day you wake up and like sometimes instead of a hangover you get like an afterglow. So if you use, yeah, kind of like that. But yeah, so yeah, that was I've kind of been rambling off topic with the medical cannabis bit, but yeah, that's basically my whole history with psilocybin, and I intend to keep on using psilocybin. As I say, I'm going to increase the dose, and I'll probably have a separate video on like other psilocybin things and other things about microdosing. I'm going to make a separate video specifically about microdosing as well, but I just wanted to explain my full history with psilocybin. That basically I've had like 2 macrodoses, 1 mega trip, but that was like many years before I got very unwell. And since being unwell, I've only microdosed, and it has helped my life. That's basically the summary of it. So yeah, if you have any questions about psilocybin or microdosing or medication or mental health or whatever, just feel free to let me know, and I'll see you in the next one.